Hello everyone. Ever since privacy became a normalized PR talking point, there are more and more buzzwords used by all kinds of companies and organizations that are trying to tell you that their product is the alternative, is the solution. However, when you look at the implementation of these buzzwords that are actually really useful, you will see gaping holes, incredibly bad security practices that are compromising your privacy and security. And they will tell you in their marketing materials that there is nothing to worry about. Just use their service. Pay for their service. Just sign up already. But the truth is that implementation matters just as much as the technology itself. So when we are talking about encryption, it matters how the encryption is actually implemented into the product. Most modern encryption is solid. It is not going to be mathematically broken, unless we're going to invent some quantum computing, but even there are algorithms in development that are claiming to be quantum proof. But the most common way for modern crypto algorithms to get broken is to just find holes in the implementation. And in this talk, you're going to learn very important information about how many companies, even the ones that are frequently recommended in the privacy community, are actually not delivering on their true promise because their poor implementation of end-to-end encryption is compromising their privacy and security promise. So I hope that you will enjoy this talk. Listen to it to the very end because it's all filled with educational content and learn something new about what kind of products and services you should use for yourself.
Alright, so I am a contributor to the Privacy Guides tool. You can find us at privacyguides.org. I help audit the software and generate a general consensus of whether the software is good enough to be recommended. Of course, with the other team members who help evaluate software. So, did you want to tell the audience what we're going to be talking about today?
Oh yeah, for sure. So you came to me because you had some ideas about your latest work, which is on end-to-end encryption. And this is a topic that I actually talked about on my channel as well, because there is some difference between, I would say, maybe what the companies are saying in their marketing materials versus what the security community would consider to be the reality. And you came to me saying, and you actually laid out pretty good notes about how a lot of these claims that they make cannot be really substantiated, and how the end-to-end encryption, the term as a whole, it's a lot murkier than it sounds at the surface, because the end-to-end encryption has been laid out as this gold standard. Like, this is what we want. We want, to have the encryption done on the client, on the user side, and no middleman in between can read the content. But since then, we've actually heard a lot of buzzwords around this, like so many products are end-to-end encrypted, but in reality, many of their implementations are not where maybe you would like them to be. So I'm really excited for what you have to say here, because this is going to be extremely knowledgeable. So yeah, take it away, man.
Okay, so first we're going to recap on how the web works, just really quick to get the audience up to speed. So we have websites, you can go to google.com. Now we're going to use a real example, like when you're going to protonmail.com. It's a popular example. So, when you make a request to protonmail.com, you are using the HTTP protocol. So HTTPS is when you make a secure connection to a website. HTTPS is Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure, which is based on TLS, which is Transfer Layer Security. This is the standard. TLS is often referred to as SSL, but TLS is actually the new standard. It was originally called SSL, now it is TLS. When you make a request to a website, they are going to serve you a client. This is also known as a web app, a web application, a website. This is how the web works. So when they send you this client, it is composed of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. HTML is the structure of a document. CSS would be the styling, and you can sort of bring some interactivity to these documents with CSS, but those are kind of hacky, depending on what you're doing. JavaScript is more like a general programming language, while HTML and CSS are declarative programming languages that declare documents and stylized documents. They're not really meant for doing typical calculations that you would do like in C or C++ or these different kinds of languages. So in JavaScript you can do things like cryptographic operations, things that you can't do in HTML and CSS. A lot of developers will know this, so basically this is kind of how the web works. They send you the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript bundles to your browser, and your browser runs the code directly. And usually it's served over HTTPS to provide you a secure connection, and the HTTP protocol is for developers to have a nice time being able to build RESTful APIs and websites, and it's decent and easy to understand. So, now we're going to be discussing why end-to-end encryption on the web is fundamentally flawed. Now, there are some differences between doing cryptographic operations on the client and cryptographic operations on the server. On the server, it can do the cryptographic operations, obviously. So I could host a website. You could send me your social security number, and I, the server, could encrypt it and store it in my database. Now, there's different architectural designs you can adopt. You can have an ephemeral cryptographic keying system, where you throw away the key after you're done using it on the server. This will help protect against adversaries that gain access to the database or the server, and when they do not have the cryptographic key. The user would then again have to make another request to the server, and then the server that would be now malicious could do such a thing, such as extract their personal information. This is one of the defense in depth techniques that some services use to protect customers' information. So that's basically how that works. So we also need to ask ourselves, is there any meaningful difference between the client and the server doing cryptographic operations? There is, because the client is doing the cryptographic operations before it's sent to the server. This is something that Live Overflow covered in his take on the Nadim Kabesi's paper. He wrote a paper about Proton Mail's architectural design for cryptography.
Yes, and this is the paper that I've actually covered briefly, but I was actually wrong about that, admittedly, because they were criticizing Proton Mail's not necessarily architecture, but they demanded that Proton Mail would stop calling their service as an end-to-end encrypted service, which to me was an interesting proposition, one which Proton Mail team, the company, rejected. If I got this right, this was years ago.
Yeah, this is right. I did watch the video, and I did read the paper, and I did watch Live Overflow's video again just to catch up the speed. But it was something I've been aware for years. So it's been a pretty big problem in regards to how companies are marketing their products. And this is mostly a problem with companies marketing it towards their web apps. Because, again, web apps are not really designed for this kind of architecture, and we're just kind of zip tying it and duct taping and just trying to make it work, but it's not really a good design for it. And there's lots of ways to get around this. The end-to-end encryption that is done in the browser. And there's lots of blog posts about it online. You can just look it up and you can generally find some other people talking about this too. It's not new, but it is still a very big problem today. So
I just wanted to clarify for the people that might not be up to the speed with the technicalities here. We're mostly talking about the differences, like if we look at the example of ProtonMail, between the protonmail.com, the website where you log in with your information and where you decrypt your inbox, versus the native app that you would have on your mobile device, like an iPhone or iOS. So this is what the paper by Nadim Kobeisi and the video by Live Overflow were also about, that as you correctly described it, that the marketing materials around the web app of the email service of the protonmail.com, that's where they had the problems with. They were not really saying that the app is compromised. They were saying that there are legitimate problems with the architecture of the web app.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So we also kind of have to draw a line. We have to be like, well, how far should we be willing to go down the chain of trust? Because there's all these lower parts that you get to. So you can think of an app. You will ask yourself, do I trust it? Okay. Then once we get down that layer, we're like, well, do we trust the developers? Well, you could say yes. But then someone else could say, well, do you trust the programs and the compilers that they're using to make these apps? And then you could be like, well, yeah, that's fine. And then you could be like, well, what about their operating systems, or the kernel, or the hardware? So one of the important things we have to do is to kind of put ourselves in, we expand this chain of trust to a reasonable level. So why it is a reasonable level to discuss web applications in this manner is because websites, servers get hacked all the time. They do. You can find it in news all the time. TechLore does a surveillance report discussing this. So you can imagine why this would be an important matter, because websites do get hacked all the time. And if a website can get hacked, their servers, they can serve you a malicious client. A client composed of the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Although they're going to be mostly interested in the JavaScript, which is where all the cryptographic operations are done in. So, why would these companies do this? Well, here's one thing. They can serve a product easily to a lot more users if they have a web application. It's one of the it's a common strategy to serve a web application, and they often make it so that way you can install it onto your phone, your browsers. You can just install it as an app. The thing is that it's still connecting to the site. The client is still controlled by them. They do this because it's easier for the users to adopt their apps. And because they do that, that means they get more profit. It's a profit incentive. And there is edge cases where it can be useful to do this type of design. So it can prevent leakage of data when access to the cryptographic keys isn't present. A given example is when only the database is compromised, which is something that has happened a fair bit. Or the server is compromised, but the user hasn't connected to the website while it has been malicious. So there are ways to further provide better protection for users, but it's not definitive. It could be much better. This is one of the flaws with the web. it could prevent some exploits, such as SQL injection. The way SQL injection works is that you can improperly encode parameters that are being sent to the database, and then when these parameters are improperly encoded, it could lead to the SQL injection vulnerability that is unfortunately still common. But if you encrypt or otherwise hash a user input before you do SQL queries, it basically makes SQL injections much harder to do. It basically makes them impossible to do. And there are some cases where you can't do parameterized SQL queries. So, in cases like this, it can be extremely helpful to do strict typing, whitelisting on the inputs, and then also doing encoded with cryptography to help prevent any sort of issues. So yeah, there are definitely some cases where doing cryptographic operations on user input can increase the security of their backend a lot.
Makes sense.
Okay, and so now we need to discuss why it is flawed. You still need to trust in the servers, because the servers are the ones who are in control of the client that is being sent to you. They control the client, so that's the HTML, CSS, JavaScript. They have complete control over it, and they are continuously serving this to users. There is no accountability. They do not sign all of their programs that they send to you. Basically, they send you this data over HTTPS, and they do not sign their work. It's just the server serving the client, this client.
Yeah, and I actually remember ProtonMail counter-arguing against this, saying that, well, even if we sign the keys for the Android and the iOS platform, nobody in there is checking for malicious code in it. So it doesn't matter that we don't sign the keys for the web app, because no one would be looking for the malicious code in it anyway.
I think that's a little far-fetched, because I'm one of those nerdy people that likes to decompile Android applications. Sometimes I like to just pick a random app and decompile it. I also do it with, typical executables with like GitRaw or x64 debug or something like that.
So you do that. You do that on your own, right? So you do that as a user, sort of like But the platforms themselves are not necessarily doing this. They just verify the keys and that's it, right?
By platforms, do you mean the browser?
Like no. I mean, when you said that you like to decompile the app, the native app, I assume. So when for example ProtonMail is delivering the app to the Google Play Store or the App Store on Apple, no one in there is actually looking for malicious code or backdoors in updates that are being sent to the app. They are not actually like auditing the apps themselves, the code.
Yeah, this is where it kind of starts to derail, but there is actually a new problem that's risen up in the past year or two. Google Play now requires new app developers to give the developers their signing keys. Basically, the Google Play Store signs the application. They basically have complete control over it. And, you could be reasonably okay with that, and I think it's probably fine enough for most people, but it's kind of a problem. Kind of like the web issue. And I'll get onto it later why this is probably not a reason for you to just completely ditch these services, but that's a new problem.
Okay.
But older applications can still serve APKs directly to Google Play and have users download it like that. But Google Play wants the app bundles now, which is basically direct access to the source code, sort of. And they sign everything, and they automatically determine which architecture to serve to users. Like x84, or not x84, x86, or ARM64. But yeah,
so would you say this is a better step for the security, or is it too much? Is it too much of a trade-off, giving Google too much power?
I'd say that's a step too far for too much power, because that's a lot of power, because they're the ones making the APK files from the app bundles, and they're signing it. But then again, you already have to trust Google Play, because they could just modify the APK file. Because when you install an APK file, an Android app, onto your phone, or whatever Android device you have, it's a trust on first use security model. So when you first install an Android app, if it is a malicious app, like it was intentionally manufactured to look like a different app, kind of like phishing, but malicious instead, then yeah, that's the problem, because that's the trust on first use security model. So if you install an Android app onto your device, and it is a safe app, and let's just assume it is the good app, it is not malicious. But then when you go to install the same app, you think it is, but then they sign it under different keys, Android won't let you install it. So it's based on the trust on first use model. So when Google serves you an APK file just to install on your device, if they intercept every single APK file, they can always modify it and inject their own code, inject their own malicious code, basically.
Is this exclusive to Apple, or to Google, or is this also present in Apple on the App Store?
To be fair, this isn't really my expertise, and I don't know much about Apple. I have never owned an Apple device.
Yeah,
but I have done investigative work into, like, at least a little bit of how Android works, and this is one of the new things that's popped up in the past couple of years. And I think they're enforcing it sometime soon. I think it was last year, maybe, or this year, that they're enforcing it.
I think it was introduced in Android 12, and it will be required from Android 13, if I'm not mistaken. But don't quote me on this.
I'm not entirely sure on the whole matter. But back to the end-to-end encryption on the web. So you still have to trust the servers, as I already said, with the client. They still have complete control over it. Now, the thing is that the server can also... The web is designed to serve content dynamically to individual people, or certain demographics. We can serve content for specific people, like, based on their IP. We could serve content for Russian people. We could serve content for American people. We could serve content for Italian folk, you know? And we can also serve content based on who they are. So, this is an important property of the web, because we can serve content based on who people are dynamically. So what this means is that servers can also target individuals. And when they can target individuals, they can also target malicious applications to these individuals on the web. Now, you can probably think of why this could be a problem, especially with services like Bitwarden. Bitwarden is a popular password manager, and they also have Web Vault. People can access this Web Vault, and they could technically target specific individuals at any time. So when you sign in, they could target you specifically. And they could inject malicious code and extract all your passwords, your credit cards, any other personal information that you may have stored on Bitwarden.
They could do this based on my IP address or based on my account information. They see it's me and they serve me a malicious JavaScript code, and I think everything is acting as normal, but at the back end they know that they have access to my data, and I have no way of verifying.
Sort of. There's some ways to do it, but it's not easy.
Okay.
So, now we'll move on to, like, a claim that I've heard a lot. That basically people will find out if the client is malicious. But it's not easy. You're not going to log every single request you make to these end-to-end encrypted websites. Most people are not going to log every single request they make to these sites. And then, they're also not going to log every single TLS record, which would be required to be able to verify that the server had sent a malicious code. And then, you would also have to provide the cryptographic keys for the TLS connection, or the TLS records. So that way you could let the community verify that this is the truth, that they did receive a malicious client from the server. But again, it's complicated and you have to set up some tools for that, and it's not easy as far as I'm aware. There's tools like SSL dump, which is a popular tool. I think you can use that for this, but it's complicated. So, it's unlikely that users will log every request they make to these sites. I mean, you're not going to do that, right?
I mean, I've never done that because why would I, right? This is like the issue with the trust with in the servers is that like at some point you're gonna lose your mind if you want to do that like consistently, and you can either give up or become Richard Stallman.
Yeah, and even then, that's just to help verify that there was a malicious application sent to you. It doesn't protect you from a malicious application being sent to you.
Exactly, yeah.
Because you want to prevent it from happening, right? You don't want your data stolen. Yeah. You don't want people getting access to your password manager. It won't protect you from that.
Yeah, you have to get the malicious client in order to know what's up, and by then it could be already too late.
And some people say that it'll destroy their reputation if the community finds out a user received a malicious client. And that's debatable because servers get hacked, and the service provider could claim that they were hacked. And either way, there's no way for anybody to really verify any of this. And here's another thing. Users will often post screenshots of like JavaScript they've received or image files they've received from given sites. But anybody can modify this. Every user can open up the DevTools in their browser and modify scripts sent to them to make it look like the service provider was malicious. They could make the site look exactly the same. You can set up a host file on your computer and have it go to like protonmail.com to forward to your own web server. So you can make it look exactly like ProtonMail, and you can make it look exactly like it in the browser. So you could basically blame them and provide, quote, proof that they did this thing. But it's not definitive proof. Anybody can fabricate this sort of claim
Yeah, so you cannot prove it didn't happen, and you cannot prove it did happen.
basically.
Yeah,
And it
and th-
provides these service providers with plausible deniability. And
yeah,
often this can be a good thing, but in this case it's a bad thing because we want to be able to hold them accountable, right? And then they can just claim that, hey, we got hacked, we didn't do it.
yeah.
But, who's gonna know who to believe who? Because nobody can prove anything.
Yeah, and also to this point, there is now the case with the Australian anti-encryption law. I'm not sure exactly how the bill is called, but it has been passed, or it has passed rather, and there are some three technical requests or assistance requests that the Australian law enforcement can make, and one of them basically requires that an employee of a company would be ordered to serve malicious codes to a specific user to bypass this kind of encryption, and they would not be allowed to say to anyone under threat of like 5 to 10 years of jail and significant fines. So, and this is not just in Australia. They've been trying to do this in the UK as well, but because the UK was in the European Union, the European Court of Justice struck that down. But they are trying to get back to that. I'm not sure if it's in Canada. It's not in the United States. But it is something that people should keep in mind. Like you can have a perfectly like benign service provider, and they could be hijacked by a rogue employee, or something like that.
Okay.
Is that is
Yeah,
that
I've
is that
never even
correct?
heard of
Or
that.
okay, you've never heard of that law?
No.
Okay, well this is one of the big drawbacks of Session, the Session messenger, who was forked out of Signal, and it's they actually have a post about this, how they think it doesn't legally affect them, but I don't know. It affects everyone who lives in Australia. It affects all Australian residents and citizens, and they are both their business is residing in Australia. It's kind of like not necessarily a technical thing, but it was it was because like Australia is in the Five Eyes, so it is the alliance makes it so that the capability of one country is shared with all the others. So all the global services that have offices in Australia could now technically be served these requests on behalf of the United States government, because that could happen. It's not outside of the limit of the Australian law. How often they do this, we don't know, because we don't have any information about it. There's no transparency here. Because there are so many gag orders written into the law in Australia now, like 5 to 10 years. Even like you cannot go to the judge, you cannot go to the press, you you cannot tell your own employer about this, and if you do so, then you will automatically go like 5 to 10 years uh, in jail. So pretty harsh. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I never even heard about that law, but the technicalities of that situation is definitely true. They definitely could do something like that.
Okay. That's pretty
Whether or
terrifying.
not their employees would find out, uh, I'm not so sure. Because, everyone has to review code, and being able to get that in without anybody noticing is, it's definitely a bit far-fetched, if you ask me. Without anyone else in the company detecting such a thing. They would probably have to go with someone like a senior software developer or someone who's higher up to be able to get past all the channels they would have to go through.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, like, there's the code review process, and if you're developing an open source application, there are contributors too who check out pull requests and all sorts of things and review commits. And getting something like that under sneaking that in is not exactly easy.
Mm-hmm.
But it depends on a lot of factors, so I don't know for sure.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I
me
would
neither.
say it's not
Yeah,
easy.
yeah. We don't have a record of this being used in practice at all. So it's been a couple of years. It's been like 2019 ish. So maybe 3 years. Um, but yeah, we actually don't have a record of companies hijacking their users through malicious JavaScript either, right? Do you know of any?
I personally don't know of any.
Okay.
I mean, I've actually seen some reports about DuckDuckGo sending trackers to users, but again, there's no definitive proof, and
Mm-hmm.
you can't really expect the kind of privacy like with other apps that you can get with something like a search engine. With the way they're designed, you can't really expect to get much privacy out of them. So to me, that's personally not a very big deal in regards to those type of applications. But there are certain applications where you should definitely be more aware of, and this is definitely something that's a bit of a problem in their community, where we just kind of blindly accept everything that markets itself as secure. Pretty
Mm-hmm.
much, like people just recommend Talks, a messaging application, or people just recommend Session, and they say that they use Tor, but in the early days they did not use the full Tor node structure that they were supposed to. It was only through one node, which is basically like a VPN. So
Yeah.
there were some pretty big problems, and people just saw that they routed for Tor because of their marketing. And me and a few others had looked at their white paper, and we discovered that they weren't
So
going through Tor.
which one are you talking about? Is it the talks or session?
Session for that
Okay.
matter,
Okay.
actually.
All right.
Talks has had an open issue in regards to how adversaries can basically sidestep the crypto. There's
Yeah.
a pretty big stink, a big issue that you could probably be able to find. I'll see if I can send it to you after we're done.
Sure.
Yeah. So one of the this is kind of just general, but people are too quick to trust services just because they say that they're secure, whatever. And Bitwarden is partially part of this problem too, because they hold very critical data for users, and they make such bold claims, but it doesn't hold up for their web vault. And there's a reason why I think Bitwarden's a bit of a problem in regards to this area, because they do not have all features available on native clients, so you are forced to use the web vault. In some cases, like when you have to reset your password, or when you want to purchase their service, or when you want to enable multi-factor authentication, you have to use the web vault, which means you have to supply your passphrase, which is the same passphrase that encrypts your passwords.
Why would they do this? That sounds pretty intentional.
I'm not
I mean, the
sure.
design. No? Don't you think so?
I don't know for sure, but I think it's definitely a bit of a stink.
Is it because they're trying
feels
to push people into using their premium version, or why is it so? Because they have a free version that you don't have to pay for. It's also open source, like so it's like a plus, I guess. But they have a paid version, and I guess they want to push people into using. I don't know, but like what you are saying is like it sounds like they're intentionally trying to regress their security model, and I don't even know why they would do this.
I had gone through some of their forums, and I had
Mm-hmm.
seen a couple of people bring it up, but then they were just told to self-host, which is not a viable option for average users. But anyway, these features that are only available via the web vault, these features could absolutely be implemented into the native client. They just don't. And I'm not sure why. I haven't exactly contacted them about it either, so.
So which
But
one of
this
these
is,
features that are not available in the native app and
um,
are in the web vault?
you have, when you want to reset your password, so when you want to change it,
Mm-hmm.
when you want to pay for their service, so when you want to buy a plan, you have to go to the web vault, and when you want to enable multiple factors of authentication. So if you want to have more than just a password.
Okay.
But unless they've changed it, it was a couple months ago I had tested it again because I've been keeping an eye on it, but that's what it was. Password reset, payment, and multi-factor authentication.
Well, at least the
Yeah.
multi-factor authentication. I think that one it also requires that you pay. It's not available to the free plan, no?
Oh, I didn't know that. Huh. Well,
But yeah,
anyway.
don't quote me on that. Yeah.
Yeah, they definitely have features that are not available on the native client, which I always kind of thought was a little bit odd, but whatever.
Whatever.
I don't know. I think it's pretty stupid, but
Okay. Well, shots fired.
yeah. So I can expand a bit on Proton Mail, Tutanota, and other similar end-to-end encryption email clients.
Yeah.
So with what all I just said, you might be like, well, I should not use these services at all. And that's not entirely the case. With email, most of the emails you're going to receive or send are already not encrypted. And Proton Mail and Tutanota specifically, they only automatically end-to-end do end-to-end encrypted emails between participants within the same network. So you have to send, you both have to be Tutanota users, or you both have to be Proton Mail users. And while you can encrypt to other users with PGP and Proton Mail, don't quote me on this, but there's been some controversies about Proton Mail holding private keys and basically generating them on. Basically, it's technically possible for them to have your private keys. So, email isn't end-to-end encrypted. So you shouldn't really expect any sort of privacy from these email providers, like any email provider, because most of your communications are not going to be using PGP or whatever else, because you're just typically not going to. And with that said, even if you do, PGP doesn't have a lot of the security properties that other cryptographic protocols do. Like Signal, you have forward secrecy, you have deniability, you have authenticity, confidentiality, and PGP only has two of those, which is authenticity and confidentiality. But it does not have forward secrecy, so once your one key is compromised, they have access to absolutely everything. Signal operates differently. Now, I understand that there are different platforms and different formats, so we can't all just use an instant messenger for everything. But the truth is that PGP has less security properties than other cryptographic protocols do.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, Signal also refused or rejected to serve a web app specifically because of the reasons that you have mentioned, that the level of trust is just not what they want to deal with in their security model. And also that the perfect forward secrecy that Signal is using, that has been reversed in Session. So Session is not using forward secrecy, which is very strange. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this is what I've read. And it is one of the most essential properties, at least for me when I'm picking a secure messenger. So I don't consider email to be secure or private at all. It's just, maybe you can protect the content, maybe you can verify that it's you or authenticate it's yourself who is sending the message by signing signing it before you send it. But yeah, as you said, that's it, and that's not enough today.
Yeah. And you should probably still use Proton Mail or Tutanota or one of the other services, because they generally do require less personally identifiable information for operations such as signing up or, I believe when I had my Google account, you were required to give your phone number to be able to set up two-factor authentication, which I usually just do TOTP-based authentication or my hardware security key that I have. But you can't set that up on Google without giving up your phone number. So this is one of the reasons why you could choose like one of these services. And yeah, they just generally offer better security features without having to give up your personal information. And I've heard some issues about people being able to sign up on these services through Tor, and I really don't know much about the matter. And if it really is true, then that's unfortunate. But I personally have not had issues signing up on through Tor with the likes of Tutanota or ProtonMail.
Yeah, they usually just pause your account for some time, or they give you some sort of recaptcha request or something like that.
Yeah, and considering that Tutanota these services are basically paying for you, it's a free service, I think you can afford to wait a little bit to deal with it. Because Tutanota doesn't even let you have two accounts as the same person. You have to purchase a new account. You're only allowed one account, according to their terms of service.
Yes, according to them.
So there are lots of things that users and developers can do to improve the situation. Like I already said, it depends on the threat model. I didn't say that, but it does depend on your threat model. So if you're making a search engine, you probably don't need any of these sorts of security properties, because that's just not how typical search engines work. Now, we're talking about critical applications where you're putting your passwords into. This is definitely something you would want to do. So developers can adopt transparency, so they can use open source licenses, get involved in the community, try to have security folk get involved so they can help review code, and then they can get audits. They're expensive, but that's one of the other things, is to help prove that your app is secure, is to get some audits and peer reviews by security experts, and then hold yourself accountable, the developers. Not necessarily like punish them, but developers to sign their Git commits, their Git tags, Git pushes when available, to prevent security issues, and to also be aware of who did what. And there's this competition called the Underhand C competition, where you can basically hide seemingly non-suspicious code in an open source project and have it get deployed, and it's an intentional vulnerability, but it looks fine in plain sight when you're looking at the code. So there's definitely a very deep rabbit hole that us developers kind of have to go into, because for us there is the problem of the compilers and underhanded C related challenges that people can do. But for the most part, what we can do is to use standard practices, because often we're always trying to come up with something new or fancy or what we think is right, and you can see it in lots of end-to-end encrypted apps these days, is when people try to get clever. You can see it with the popular Mega service. It's a cloud service. A lot of you have probably heard of it. or you might even use it.
Oh yeah.
They use every
No.
possible encryption algorithm you can think of under the sun. Now, I've personally reviewed their white paper, and it's kind of scary, but I haven't found any actual security vulnerabilities in it, but it's very weird and very non-standard and kind of spooky because they're doing all these XOR operations, and XOR operations can be adverse in certain scenarios, so it's like, why the fuck is this here, you know? What are you doing? Why is it so weird and obscured? So someone would have to evaluate like all these mathematical properties to see if you could extract certain keys and stuff. But they're using things like AES and ECB mode. Like, seriously, why couldn't you just stick with one encryption algorithm that's been vetted and, you know, it's pretty easy to do. Just use AES GCM or Cha-Cha 20. Like, it's so easy. Like, cryptographers make it so easy for developers to just pick and choose and stick with it. And, so, Mega kind of does some weird stuff. And you can find this sort of shit all over the internet.
This is crazy that there are so many services out there that are boasting some new proprietary encryption technology, when that's such a no-go to anyone who is actually working in crypto, because you don't want to come up with a new proprietary encryption protocol or algorithm. So just use what's available, as you said. Like we've had these encryption algorithms that have worked for years. They've been vetted, they have been tested, and most cryptographers or all cryptographers would tell you that modern encryption is not getting broken mathematically. They try to find loopholes in the implementation. They maybe try to social engineer the target or something like that, or go around it, but they don't brute force the algorithm itself. But there are some services out there that are boasting proprietary technology, and I just stay away from them because I don't understand why they would even do this. I do have a couple of questions for you though, if you don't mind, but finish up if you haven't yet.
Yeah, I do want to correct you on one point. There is that what I just some of the things I said about Mega, it is open source, not the backend though.
Yeah.
But the white paper, the protocol, everything is open source. It's just really weird and obscure. And it's definitely not something you want to do.
Yeah, I've never tried Mega. I was thinking mostly about Dashline when you mentioned proprietary technology, because they have been. I noticed that in their marketing materials, and yeah, I think it's pretty bad that they're getting away with fooling people with this.
Yeah, I don't really know much about Dashlane. And so the last thing I want to bring up to like an average user, any of you. You can improve the situation by reporting these architectural issues to developers of these programs or, whatever. You just bring up these architectural issues that are present within their design, because if we want to have an improved security for all of us, we're going to have to tell them about these security issues. And the problem is that in my experience, people are often dismissive towards security developers when they're making, quote, marginal security improvements or anything like that. That's kind of been a problem in the community, is they boast secure products, but then they don't make significant improvements, or they downplay issues. This is something that's happened.
Yeah.
So if for example, if something's not like remote code execution, or if it's just a small security improvement, they're far less likely to pay any attention to you.
that's a good point as well. That the security experts are oftentimes dismissed by the companies themselves. Security departments are not usually the biggest departments in any company or corporation, which is pretty sad. But it is true, yeah. And one of my question was, if users only use native apps and stay away from all web apps of these products, are they going to be more secure generally, would you say? Or is it just that the mere presence of the web app just makes the whole product just inherently less secure?
The presence of the web application being present isn't like a security vulnerability, but if users do use it, it could be considered a potential vulnerability for them. So, one thing service providers could do is provide a warning for users on these web platforms, being like, hey, it's more secure to use native apps. Please use them instead. This is one simple thing that they could do during sign up or sign in processes to kind of help keep users secure if they must keep a web app. But there are certain companies or organizations that don't even offer a web app because of the security issues that can come from having users use these web applications. And Signal is the most popular advocate of this security practice. They don't offer any web apps, but Threema does. A lot of other popular, supposedly secure messengers do this thing too. And I don't really think it's a good idea to be boasting end-to-end encryption and have it being said that it's secure for a typical web application, because it's generally not. Because like I already said before, the server can just serve you a malicious client and bypass all of the mathematical security properties, which is the general thing is that we never typically brute force cryptographic algorithms. We always step around them. That's 99.999% of the time of what we're doing in cryptographic problems, and it's what we're usually doing. It's what security researchers are usually doing when they're auditing software. They find a way to step around the crypto because it's just too hard to take a pickaxe to it. You can't really do that. Like, just to give you perspective, Cha-Cha with 8 rounds is secure. And only Cha-Cha 6 is getting close to being broken. Cha-Cha 7 is academically broken, but you could argue that it's still secure in a practical security scenario. But typically we use like Cha-Cha 20, which is Cha-Cha with 20 rounds, and as cryptographers get further into the rounds, the differential cryptanalysis gets harder. All these properties get harder as they go deeper into these algorithms. So it's negligible to do things like that. And cryptographers are usually finding different ways to get around cryptographic algorithms, such as power analysis. And it's always about sidestepping the crypto.
Yeah. I mean, one extreme opinion on this could be that, the mere presence of the web app could be a security vulnerability, because now if you want to set up a communication between contacts, you cannot verify that they are using at least as equal setup as you are. So, for example, in Signal, you would know that all of your contacts are using a Signal that has been downloaded from the App Store, so it's the same security model. For the most part, some Android users would download the APK if they don't use the Play Store. But when you have a web app, And I think Wire Messenger, you said Threema. So you would have a native app that you would verify. You would even go the lengths to make sure that the app doesn't contain any sort of malicious code or something that doesn't come from the benign developer. But then they could be using a web app to communicate with you, and you wouldn't necessarily know about that in real time. So you could be safe on your side, but your contacts would be using a potentially compromised version of the same service,
Yes.
which is something that Signal eliminates from this equation entirely.
Yep. And yeah, there is a bit of a problem with just having them present. It just depends, but you wouldn't necessarily know that your friend is using the web app or not, because there's usually no like proper way to detect that. Sometimes they, Matrix, for example, you can get Element and you can go to the website and use it from there, and you can do. It'll display that you're using Element on the web, but you can always change the name of that. You can always basically lie. It's kind of like a user agent on the web. You can just change it. And there's no way to verify that you're actually just on the web. So to not provide a web application is generally much better for the security of users, because then you don't have to worry about these sorts of things. And this is kind of moving into the thing, what we're trying to do at Privacy Guides is we're trying to bring a new standard to recommending secure software. We phased out most of our social media recommendations. We phased out most software that was web end-to-end encrypted, because there's just no way for us to, or anyone really, to be able to verify it's secure because of how many, because of the loophole there is. It's just too risky for us in general to recommend something like that. And it just depends. We're probably going to work on making exceptions for this rule. And it's not really a rule, we just been kind of phasing out the less secure recommendations. What other questions did you have?
Yeah, so just to follow up on this, so Privacy Guides is no longer going to be recommending an encrypted service that has a web version of it.
Not necessarily that, but the native applications are most likely going to be a requirement. And with Signal setting a gold standard, this is the reason why no other messengers has been recommended from Privacy Guides, because there is no messenger that is significantly better than Signal, even with the phone number requirement.
I mean, you could argue technically that maybe some peer-to-peer messengers that are also going to lengths to be metadata analysis, to be resistant to metadata analysis, that could be more secure, because Signal does encrypt some metadata, like your contacts with your PIN number and stuff. It does protect some of the metadata with the sealed sender, but it is possible for advanced persistent threats, server providers or ISPs even, to figure out who is communicating with who over Signal, technically. Now, if you're obfuscating some of that information, maybe with Tor or something like that, that could make it more difficult, but I guess most people are not going to do that, especially with a native app, for which you would need something like ORBot to configure your Signal to be routed through Tor. So you could say that, yeah, the Signal is a standard, but it is a standard, so there are maybe better options that, yeah, they are not as well developed as Signal at the moment, but they are trying to get there, maybe. But if you disagree, that's fine. Like, yeah, that's just, one of the points that I bring up.
I generally agree with that.
Signal.
The reason why we wouldn't recommend most other messengers is because Signal is just so easy to use and set up.
It is easy to use and set up, yeah, and that's also important, to because with PGP, it's one of the biggest problems is that there is no easy automation of it. So you kind of had to set it up yourself, use the software to generate the keys, and then exchange the keys with your contacts, and now your contacts have to do the same.
Yeah.
If you had a magic wand, would you just get rid of all the web apps if you could?
No.
Especially for the most sensitive applications like messaging, email, cloud.
If I had a magic wand, I'd make secure stuff and then get rid of the web apps, but otherwise, no.
Okay, this is a trade-off, and it's a balance, because it is true that these end-to-end encrypted services that provide email, for example, they are generally going to be more private, at least for the fact that your social graph is not necessarily going to be used for something like advertising or something like that. So whether you are communicating with your doctor or your family, friends, that's not going to be used by these third parties. So mainstream options, they are going to use your social graph for this purpose. And there is value in there in these services, but privacy and security are not necessarily the same standard. So they have security limits, they have some privacy value, but we should definitely not oversell them.
Mm-hmm. And this is the main thing I wanted to address, is that these end-to-end encrypted web applications have certain use cases where it can be extremely useful to use them. And the structure, this could be done entirely on the back end, but they typically do it on the client, is where they handle these cryptographic operations, and it helps keep their clients' data more secure. And again, it's not as strong as serving people native applications, but as a general sense, it does improve the security by just general attackers getting access to their servers. So, I mean, it's still a better thing, but whether it's significantly better than what we were having, which was, some services like, what was it, Lava Bit? That was doing the cryptographic operations on the server instead. Again, there's not much difference between the client when it's served to your web browser and the operations being done on the server. There's not much difference there. They can always, bypass that.
So speaking just technically and hypothetically, what happened to LavaBit in 2013, 14-ish, I don't know, was that the FBI went to the provider and they told them, you are going to give us the keys because we are investigating a target, and the operator of LavaBit decided to shut down the entire service rather than giving out the keys. Now, then ProtonMail came in, it was created, and they offered the option of this end-to-end encryption that we are not going to have the access to the keys because, it's going to be the users who are going to be using their passwords to protect the decryption keys. But with this problem that the JavaScript can actually work around that encryption and can give ProtonMail access to your inbox without needing your decryption key, then would you think that the FBI could do this to ProtonMail? Well, or some Swiss company, some Swiss law enforcement agency could go to ProtonMail and force to maybe surveil a target?
The technical ability is there. They absolutely can do this sort of thing. Whether or not the legal parties would actually go to that length is questionable. I don't know much about it in terms of legal settings, but in a technical sense, they absolutely can do that. They can just read your entire page with the JavaScript. They don't even have to decrypt everything. Once you open up your inbox on the web app, they could just read everything using a JavaScript. Read all the elements on the page, all their contents, just send it to somewhere. You know, they don't even have to decrypt anything because it's already decrypted and displayed on the web page. So
could the NSA or some adversary like this, really powerful adversary with pretty much limitless resources, break into Proton Mail servers or somehow modify intercept the connection between the user, the client, and the Proton Mail website, and inject malicious code to get plain text access to the inbox?
absolutely, they could.
Is this easier to do with the website or than with the native app?
It wouldn't necessarily be possible with a native app because users will be able to trust on first use, and it depends on a lot of factors, but it's much easier to do this sort of attack on web applications. And I'm not saying it's impossible to do it with native apps. It's a bit too deep into the weeds once we start talking about the native apps and how we can bypass all that. There's always a way to bypass something, basically, but we also kind of have to improve our situation. We can't just not improve things because we're like, well, might as well just not do it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
This is what we want to do. We want to improve the situation. We don't just want to be sitting ducks.
Yeah.
But it once you start getting into the weeds, it gets harder to do these sorts of things. But right now, it's pretty easy to do something like that with a web app.
Well, this is really scary to think about, is because we are sitting ducks. We are just trusting these centralized servers, or even if they're decentralized, doesn't matter. And there's no way to secure this. The native app architecture is just better in all aspects. So, and also to maybe find a vulnerability on a desktop version of an app or just a browser version, it's a lot cheaper. These exploits are not that expensive, whereas exploits for a mobile operating system go $2.5 million for one. So it's a lot harder to hack into a phone than it is to hack into a browser on a desktop or a laptop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these sorts of exploits are a lot more complicated, especially on mobile devices. Windows devices, it'd probably be pretty difficult, especially if you lock it down. Linux is probably going to be a bit easier, especially if you just sudo random programs that you download. That's really bad. Don't ever do that. They can get root access that way pretty easily, just running programs with root privileges. Even with sudo, it's just a temporary privilege escalation to root. That's all it does.
Yeah.
So it can be pretty easy. But I'm not an expert on that. That's kind of more Mad Aiden's area, Linux developer.
Okay. Is there anything else that you wanted to share with these wonderful people to make them even more paranoid?
I don't think I want to make them more paranoid. I just kind of wanted to bring up that, you really shouldn't trust every single product that gets recommended based on marketing, and that web apps are, they can be easily manipulated by the service provider or hackers who gain access to their servers.
Yeah, well, I hope that people are going to learn from this and they're going to be able to make better decisions, better steps to protect their own privacy and security. What is it that you would recommend people that they do if they want to just take away something from this dog and just do something right after they finish listening?
Probably take a step away from Threema, and probably take a step away from web apps if you can, where possible, where it's convenient enough for you. Don't do something that's going to cause such inconvenience to your life that's gonna impact you negatively. Because, even security experts, they just don't fucking have time for all this shit.
Yeah.
Like, if you can, find easy to use software. Signal is one of them that I can just straight up recommend anytime over Telegram or WhatsApp or any of these other apps. It's easy to set up, and it significantly improves your privacy. But
Yeah, it does, and security as well.
And this is definitely some of the space that needs to be addressed. Is easy to use security software, privacy software. It's just not very common, and that's something us developers need to work on. And I think Bitwarden is a good example of an easy to use password manager, but it has some issues. But I'm not necessarily saying that people should stop using it, but users should definitely be aware of what can happen to them. And if it fits their threat model, then they should probably move away from it.
Yeah, that's the thing, that the well has been poisoned too much, Like, people don't want to install these apps because they've heard so many stories about how these apps are tracking them, and in many cases they really are. Even many of the apps that are designed for security and privacy purposes, many of them have trackers in them. Not the ones that we were talking about here necessarily, but still, it's like a lot of people say, I don't want to use your app. I'd rather use my browser on my Linux laptop because I don't want to have your trackers on my phone tracking me all the time. And yeah, that's a fair point, but it's also important to understand this security limitation of the web, and that's what many of these critics don't admit. And it's kind of like a trade-off. Like, yeah, phone is a much more secure environment because of the security model of Android and iOS as well. It's a lot harder to break away from a single app to infect your system to get access to other data. It's so heavily sandboxed. There's so many layers of security in there. It's crazy. And on Linux, there's pretty much nothing. So you're exposing yourself to web apps that can, well, frankly, they can actually hijack your entire system. It's not just about the service that you're using. So it's very strange. I made this mistake years ago, that I thought that web applications would be more private because you would be avoiding these trackers on your phone. But with the increasing amount of hacking attempts and how cybercrime is becoming just a massive market, like multi-trillion-dollar market annually, it's just so common to get hacked and to have all of your data exposed, and that's definitely not something that I want to happen to me or anyone that I care about.
I think that sums it up pretty well for everything.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate this talk. It has been very educational, and I'm looking forward to talking to you again sometime if you are up for it. You definitely have a lot of information that people need to know. Where can people find your work?
You can find my work on GitHub, realguyman at GitHub. You can also find my older account, Lynn Stevenson, which was a different alias I went under, but I had reviewed the security of the Aegis Authenticator, an authenticator app that you guys probably use. I took a look at its crypto. You can find it on my analysis GitHub Git project. And then I have implemented some crypto in the Rust programming language. So if any of you are interested in taking a look at that, go ahead.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, you do an amazing work, so thank you for that.
All right, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.